How old were the wives of the Prophet at the time of marriage? Were they all younger than him? al-Mu'mineen Khadija bint Khuwaylid is widely believed that to have been 40 years old when she married the Prophet, and the Prophet was approximately 25 years old at that time. But some scholars, including Sayyid Ja'far Murtada al-Amili, suggest that Khadija was around 28 years old at the time of her marriage with the Prophet. And this is based on calculations involving her age at death and the duration of her marriage. For instance, if she died at the age of 65 in 619, she would have been approximately 28 years old in 595 when she married the Prophet. So al-Mu'mineen Khadija was 3 years older than the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa. And then we have Aisha bint Abi Bakr. According to the narrations in Sahih al-Bukhari, Aisha was married to the Prophet at the age of 6, and the marriage was consummated when she was 9. The Prophet would have been 50 years old when he married Aisha, and that would put the character of this noble man under a huge question mark. Some scholars argue that Aisha was older at the time of her marriage. By examining the age of her sister Asma, who reportedly was 10 years older than Aisha and approximately 28 years old at the time of the hijrah, of the migration in 622. Thus, Aisha had to be around 18 years old during the migration. This would place her age at marriage closer to 16 to 18 years. And we know that she married the Prophet in 620. The Prophet would have been 50 to 51 years old. So let's break it down. In 622, at the time of hijrah, she was 18 years old, because we know that her sister Asma was 28 at that time and 10 years older than her. And we know that she married the Prophet in 620. So 18 minus 2 equals 16. Hence she must have been around that age and not what these false narrations claim. So Aisha was 35 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. And then we have Sauda. Sauda, she was between 40 to 50 years old. She was a widow, and the Prophet married her after al-Mu'mineen Khadija's death. She would have been at the same age if she was 50 or 10 years younger than the Prophet. Number 4, we have Hafsa bint Umar. She was around 18 years old. She was the daughter of Umar ibn Khattab. Hafsa was a widow, was married to Khunais. He died from wounds sustained in the Battle of Uhud. She was born in 605. She married the Prophet in 625. That would make her 37 years younger than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At number 5, we have Zainab bint Khuzaymah. She was around 30 years old at the time of marriage. She was previously widowed twice before her marriage with the Prophet. She was known as the mother of the poor due to her charity work. She died within a few months of marriage. She would be 25 years younger than the Prophet. At number 6, we have Salama. She was approximately around 29 to 31 years old at the time of marriage. She was widowed before marrying the Prophet. She is known for her wisdom and her love for the Ahlul Bayt. She would be around 27 to 25 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. At number 7, we have Zainab bint Jahsh. She was around 35 years old at the time of marriage. She was divorced by Zayd. She was the cousin of the Prophet, and her marriage had a social significance related to pre-Islamic customs. She would have been 22 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. At number 8 we have Juwayriya bint al-Harith. She was around 20 years old. She was also a widow or a divorcee. We don't know exactly. She became a captive from a defeated tribe, and her marriage to the Prophet and her emancipation by him led to freeing many of the captives. She was 38 years younger than the Prophet. At number 9 we have Safiya bint Huyay. She was around 17 to 18 years old. Her husband died in the Battle of Khaybar against the Muslims, and her marriage was part of a political reconciliation. She would have been 41 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. At number 11 we have Maymuna bint al-Harith. She was around 26 to 30 years old at the time of marriage. She was the last official wife of the Prophet, and their marriage strengthened tribal alliances. She was a widow before marrying the Prophet, and she would have been 34 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. At number 12 we have Maria al-Qibtiyya. She is estimated to have been around 20 years old. She was a gift as a slave from Egypt, and she bore the Prophet a son called Ibrahim, who later on passed away. Note that it was a common custom to give gifts of slaves and concubines and handmaids, and they were usually young women of marriageable age, and often virgins, and most probably Maria al-Qibtiyya did not have any spouse before the Prophet or any intimate relationship with any male before the noble Prophet. She would have been 39 years younger than the Prophet at the time of marriage. To conclude, there is a misconception within the Muslim community where people think that the majority of the wives of the Prophet were older than him. That is not the case. The majority were younger than him. All the wives of the Prophet were younger than him, with some having a huge gap, while others a couple of years. The gap between them and the Prophet at the time of marriage. al-Mu'mineen Khadija Salamullah alayha was the only lady who was actually 3 years older than the Prophet at the time of marriage, and the Prophet stayed with her in 25 years and never took another wife until her death.